Hey there. Welcome to the final video of 2021 for me. Um, I don't usually do sort of a news update video, but there's a lot to get into about what to look forward to for Warcry in 2022. And, not a lot of other channels kind of cover sort of the wide array of stuff for the game. So here I am doing it. This is also my first video ever with this little professional microphone here. We finally get to find out if I just have a terrible voice or if I was just using terrible equipment before. So that'll be fun. Can't wait to listen to this on the way back. Let's get into it first. Starting with the box set that they just announced, Fury of the Deep for AOS. There's always a few of these, and I do want to just cover it because sometimes these boxes make for really great Warcry starter sets if you didn't have, if you haven't caught any of the terrain-based starter sets, or you already have plenty of terrain, so you don't want to get sort of a whole new box of terrain, or you want to get Warcry crews that also double for Age of Sigmar. These are often really great for Warcry. There's sort of issues with these boxes in terms of, are they kind of taking advantage of people as far as like if you want to get into one of these armies for Age of Sigmar, it usually doesn't make sense to get one of these boxes because it's stuff you can already get, and it's not as discounted as some other ways to try to hunt for models. But for Warcry, they can actually be okay because you're getting essentially 2 Warcry warbands plus some extra options for a given price. We don't know how much this is going to go for yet. So I just want to kind of jump into a little bit of what the 2 factions do. Idoneth Deepkin, you're going to find, so that faction has elite flying anvils in the case of their Ishlayan Guard. Those are really, really good pieces in Warcry. Some of the only defensive pieces in the game that I would still rubber stamp at a competitive level. But the Fury box doesn't have those. The Fury box focuses on the glass cannon infantry units that Idoneth have that are also pretty solid. I think the 2 icon bearers, both of them are totally usable. And then Reavers and Thralls are really solid, just really high mobility, lots of numbers. You can make this into a really solid warband. I've heard that the Fireslayer half of this box is going to annihilate the Idoneth half in Age of Sigmar. In Warcry, it's the opposite. I think having all these numbers, having an 11 model warband is going to put you in a really amazing place in a lot of battles, and just having a ton of mobility too is going to be really solid. Now the Fireslayers have really durable fighters that they just occasionally suffer auto loss scenarios due to 3-inch movement. I don't play Fireslayers myself, but I do play Ironjaws, which have a very similar situation in terms of a lot of 3-inch movement, really great combat stats, really tough, hard to kill. But you auto lose certain scenarios. So as long as you're okay with that, you can have a lot of fun. I do think that there's a few different ways you can build this box, of course, because you get all the options here, although you are limited in terms of heroes. But for Fireslayers, I would lean into the thing they can do that actually Ironjaws and a lot of the other 3-inch movement warbands can't do, which is shoot some ranged stuff out of there. So Auric Hearthguard are, they're perfectly serviceable ranged troops, and they, I think, look pretty cool. I actually think the Hearthguard are the best looking of the Fireslayer models, but of course your mileage is going to vary there. So I would lean on Hearthguard here to mitigate the low movement. If you do have, say, a Dispossessed Rune Lord from Tempest's Eye, that makes a great ally, and if you do have one of those, or if you decide to pick one up, then I would lean more on the Volkites with 2 weapons. I think that's your best point-for-point melee friend, but the Hearthguard are gonna actually be able to affect the battle no matter where you're fighting. So that's gonna be really good in those situations and give you fewer auto loss scenarios. There's also a lot to speculate on here. I kind of touched on a little bit of it before, but there's a few different release strategies that GW go with these boxes. You could see something like Shadow and Pain, where, like this one, it's all old models in box. But it preceded major new releases for one force and a small release for the other force, so a pretty major release in general for GW. And in that case, it's kind of a good idea to maybe back off a little on the box, because there's a good chance it's trying to sell old stuff before new stuff comes in. But it could also be something like Aether War, where we only see the new heroes and then we get AOS rulebooks, in which case the box is actually a perfect way to start one of those two factions. Say, you know, split the box with someone, take your half of the box plus a start collecting, and that's kind of your best way to jump into that faction with the new book. So we'll see what we see here. Yeah, could go either way. I know a lot of these boxes you really want to get them right away, because that's what GW is sort of telling you should do. I would only do that if you are comfortable with your ability to sell things on eBay. You know, because I think if you're doing this for Age of Sigmar, you're going to want to wait until you know what the rules are, you know what kinds of lists you want to build out of those rule books. Unless you're just so in love with one of these two heroes, though I don't see, you know, I don't think in general that they're going to sort of inspire people so much that the hero is all you've got to get, right? Otherwise, you know, I would wait for those books to see maybe if there are new releases, and you actually don't want to get these boxes, or, you know, if there aren't and the boxes are great, then you would pick them up. But either way, it's a perfectly fine Warcry starter set for the purposes of this video. So if you are interested in Warcry, Fury of the Deep is a perfectly good buy, and the heroes themselves. GW has a really good track record of bringing foot heroes into Warcry, you know, eventually. I wouldn't be surprised to see these in the Tome of Champions, something like that. So, you know, hopefully we see that. There's some interesting design space you could pick into with these. I know a lot of the time, especially recently, people have been kind of frustrated with the abilities of new additions into Warcry, maybe not delving into new design space as quickly as people would like. And that would probably continue here, but, you know, there's still a lot you could get into, right? The Thrall Master with stance shifting and helping other Namarti do the same. You could easily see something as like a modal buff, like an AoE buff for nearby Namarti, but it's modal, so you get to choose like maybe either +1 strength or +1 toughness. Man, that wouldn't be very good unless it was a double. But, you know, something like that. Or with the Auric Flame Master, you know, supposedly his powers are around using lifeless runes. Who knows what that means? But there's a huge opportunity with the Flame Keeper to help out kind of a struggling faction in Fire Slayers. I think a lot of people who play them, you know, they're just aware that you have to really power down the opposing warband in order to have a fun game with Fire Slayers. And so putting a Flamekeeper in there would be really cool if the Flamekeeper was super powerful, maybe had an ability that really helps their allies out. So yeah, we'll see on that front. I also want to talk about kind of that being probably the last Warcry starter set until we get a new edition. This is sort of we've followed very closely to the Kill Team release schedule. Things have been a little different from here and there, but the broad strokes have been very similar. And, you know, they got a new edition after 3 years. New editions seem to be kind of the bread and butter of the current release schedule that GW is working on. So I would be shocked if we didn't get one this summer. I know a lot of people have been sort of publicly calling it, and you don't get to be proud. If you're predicting that we're getting a new edition this summer and we get one, you don't get to be proud about it. It happened. It was inevitable almost. The fun thing to talk about, though, is whether we even really need one. The base rules in Warcry are really tight. A Warcry game is almost always just fun and moves quickly, and it's just an incredibly playable game. There's just nothing really wonky about it. Red Harvest made some solid balance adjustments. It's not, it's doesn't fix everything, of course, but there's just a lot to really like about the very small tweaks that Red Harvest made to the way the game plays out. So as far as what we'd change in a new edition, I would hope for a very light touch on the rules. But there are other things that you can change in a new edition other than the rules. We could get a new setting. We could hopefully we get points changes across the board. That would be wonderful. We've kind of been in a situation for a long time now of essentially we know what's good and what's not, and also what types of models are good and what types aren't. I would even say the community seems to know better than GW does, right? We've seen them release these 35-point pets over and over. I'll get to this in more later, but we are in pet meta. Whether players at tournaments sort of choose to bring pet meta or not, that is what the highest sort of competitive level of the game is about. So it would be nice to see points tweaks. It would be nice to see maybe if they changed their points algorithm a little bit. I'll definitely get into kind of a wish list for a new edition, but there are certain things we could get that wouldn't necessarily just kind of throw away the game, right? Because there are a lot of lessons to learn from Kill Team 2.0 in terms of people had a lot of issues with Kill Team 1.0 in terms of how it played, and they did a great job, from everything I've heard, addressing some of those concerns with 2.0. The problem was they also went and invalidated a lot of people's old kill teams. And that would be absolutely heartbreaking if we saw that for Warcry. Now, I assume that we're going to see kind of a change of what's good and kind of prompting you to kind of change what you're doing. Maybe a change in where the focus is. That's what I meant by a hype refresh and refocus. If we saw sort of a new setting along with a new focus on what types of fighters are good or what types of abilities you might see. I do have to say, if there was one place that you were going to tweak the game a little bit, I would say I'd want to see it tweaked on the dice system. I think right now their calculations on like how much value you should get for what types of dice roll are a little odd to me, and I think that dice in general don't play as big. They don't play as big a role in rounds as I'd like them to, except for when they completely swing everything, which can be a little bit frustrating. So we could see them do a lot of different things. One thing I've seen a lot of people wish list is expanding the cultists. So many of them are just kind of cut into either one play style or just really handicapped by just a really bad leader. So for example, Untamed Beasts are sort of my poster child for this, where you could make really interesting and powerful Untamed Beasts warbands if you didn't have to have a 180-point Heart Eater, right? If you had interesting leaders that can actually do something on the field, Untamed Beasts could be really, really good. As is, they're still solid. A 2-box Untamed Beast warband can go toe-to-toe with anything that's not just really competitive pet meta, but just most of the AOS warbands you can do it just fine. But most of the cultists are kind of struggling in the leader department. The Grand Alliance books, they kind of put the focus on making Warcry a bridge to Age of Sigmar. And I had heard that some of that was due to GW actually being pretty surprised at how well the first Warcry box sold, and then how well all the cards sold for the AOS warbands after that, and how much appetite there was for this type of game. And so they were kind of caught flat-footed and kind of looking, okay, well, what do we have around us? Well, we have all these Age of Sigmar models. Let's bring them in, and let's bring like a full course of them, a full kind of edition of Age of Sigmar stuff. It would be kind of cruel to invalidate that now. Like if you did say what the Kill Team Compendium did, as far as just like grossly simplifying what the other sort of 40k models can do in Kill Team compared to what each Kill Team can do. Now, I know from kind of lurking on some competitive scene stuff that a lot of 40k stuff competitively can still hack it with the Kill Team stuff, or even be more powerful, because they're just doing it on rate in terms of just pure power. But the boxed Kill Teams sort of, it feels like that's what the game's designed around. So like I was saying before, it would be cruel to then basically say we're making sort of the rules surrounding Warcry to be a bridge to AOS. The cultists are kind of slowly becoming actually just interesting pieces in a Slaves to Darkness AOS army, rather than necessarily like just the focus of Warcry and that's it. It would be too bad if they kind of went back on that. I would love for them to kind of expand that more, but we'll see. My ideal would be if we saw more things like the K-Knight Shadow Stalkers, where it can be a new bespoke unit in a faction somewhere, but then it's also a Warcry warband. Stuff like that, I think, would be my ideal for what we might see for just the next box set, and then still being able to use AOS units in the game. Other pieces of news, though, and this is a big one. We are now having tournaments at large events. Now, it's starting very small. When I first looked at the Adepticon details for what was going to happen, I was actually kind of gutted. They didn't list the 40-player narrative event right away today, so I just saw the 2 16-player events. Right now, that's what we're working with, is 3 events, 1 40-player narrative event, 2 16-player events that are competitive. That's not very many, not very many slots. The 2 16-player events being on the same days as the big Age of Sigmar tournament is a little gutting. But it is, maybe it will make it, because that's so few slots, right? So maybe it'll make it so that it's easier for big Warcry fans to actually get spots in the Warcry tournament. Hopefully that's the case, but in general, the low numbers does feel like kind of a lack of respect almost. Like, when you see people play, or content creators for the bigger games, when you see them play Warcry, it's almost always, the reaction is, this is amazing, but nobody plays this game, I'm not going to touch it again. Which I think is too bad, especially when you look at the Underworld tournament is 128 players, and not during the AOS event. And that's so interesting to me, because there was a huge thing before the pandemic of Underworld just having incredible numbers of people at their tournaments. I remember when Underworlds came out, I bought the first starter set. It ended up not being for me, mainly because the release schedule was just so unforgiving and just so terrible. But it's interesting that sort of after the pandemic, the legacy of that sort of initial start before the competitive scene kind of collapsed a little bit. I've heard people literally on Underworld podcasts joke that the game is dead. It's interesting that that legacy still comes into there being 128 player slots for the tournament that they're going to have. But you also see things like Frostgrave getting 3 12-person tournaments, Arena Rex having what's probably 2 32-player tournaments, but one just has 5 spots spoken for. I think that's kind of too bad, though. Maybe it's just that Games Workshop didn't necessarily push them that far, because Kill Team only getting 2 32-player tournaments and 1 16-player tournament is also not as much as I would expect, especially because the skirmish games are so much more approachable than the big games. Now, I know GW is always going to push the big games over the skirmish games because it makes them more money, but it seems from a player perspective, it should be so much easier to get people in a room to play Warcry, to play Kill Team. So it's just surprising to me that those numbers are so much lower. I did kind of skip over the narrative event a little bit. Having a 40-player narrative event at the tournament is going to be really cool. I really can't wait to sign up for that. I'm sad that there's not going to be any allies allowed. There's no allies, no monsters. No monsters, I think, is a good rule. A lot of the the power levels on the monsters in Warcry are really wonky and weird, and like some are just completely unplayable and some are just ridiculous. The Beast of Chaos big monster is just absurd, for example. So it's good that there's no monsters. For me, and I would love to see in the comments what people think about this, but for me, a narrative event means, you know, you take maybe a sillier list or something something powered down, but also, you know, if you're kind of a spiky person, or like I'm a very Johnny list builder, instead of just kind of picking like, oh, well, these are, you know, these are my favorites, these are my best friends, I'd want to do like kind of a meme list or something, and saying no allies kind of does cut down on a lot of meme combos, but I'll try to find something, you know, maybe I'll just settle on just my Iron Jaws, but we'll see. I was really excited before today when they announced the stuff to do a lot of Road to Adepticon coverage. Now that I know that there's only 32 people that are actually going to play competitive Warcry at Adepticon, I might roll that back slightly. I'll still do a few videos on it. Let me know in the comments, actually, if you would be someone who might not pick up one of those 32 competitive slots, but still interested in the tournament prep of someone who is. Because if that's the case, I think I'll still do it. I'll still kind of do essentially intro to competing. I'm definitely going to be updating my tier list after Adepticon, you know, based on sort of what people kind of show at those two 16-player events. I know that's really not a lot of data, but it's better than nothing. And, you know, if it's 5 rounds each, you get a lot of info from that, at least just watching the games play out. And, you know, I'll be there covering it. I'm definitely interested to see what people want as far as the coverage of these, as far as playing versus reporting in them. Right now, I think I'm planning to play at the narrative event and then one of the two 16 players. And I would kind of suggest a lot of other people try to do the same in this, so that way, you know, I mean, unless you have two really exciting warbands that you want to try competitively that you're really excited about, at this point with so few slots, I would kind of encourage people to take just one of the 2 days, let more people experience Warcry in a competitive level. But you know, you are your own boss, and if you've got two really cool competitive warbands and you want to try one out each day, you know, go for it, whatever. I also want to note Nova Open, August 31st to September 4th, 2022. So this is, you know, late summer, early fall. It's going to have one competitive and one narrative event. Hopefully, you know, I hope people will sign up for these Warcry events. I hope we sell them out. I hope that sort of lets the Nova folks realize that they should have more than just 16 players. Getting a 32-player event would be really cool. The Nova Open's either going to be the last tournament of the current edition, kind of a saying goodbye to the current edition, or it's going to be the first tournament of the new edition, which would be really cool. So, you know, that's pretty exciting. I would love to see, you know, basically what the competitive scene looks like coming right out of a new edition, to have such a cool base like that if that happens. But yeah, really hoping that everyone seeing this video, you know, at least considers signing up for one of the 3 Adepticon tournaments if they're in the Midwest. You know, if we sell out these Adepticon tournaments and the Warcry tournaments in the first couple days, then maybe that'll convince them to make one of the two 16s, maybe a 32, and then, you know, that's a real tournament that you can get real data from. So that would be really awesome to see. I also want to talk about, so, okay, there were a lot of different games kind of in the fantasy skirmish space that have tournaments here at Adepticon. So Frostgrave, Arena Rex, like I said, there's sort of competition coming into the space, and I think for Warcry, that's going to be one of the big things that happens for 2022 that I'm actually pretty excited about. So I've always kind of wondered why GW manages to keep their spot kind of at the top of the heap for miniature wargaming. There have been some attempts, right? Like War Machine Hordes from Privateer Press, a bunch of people were playing that in the Twin Cities for a few years, and then it kind of petered out. You know, I know people are playing Marvel Crisis Protocol right now. A lot of people dabbled in X-Wing or Star Wars Battlefront, but it seems like that's kind of petering out a little bit. Either way, we've got two companies kind of shooting at Warcry specifically, which makes a lot of sense to me because fantasy is big right now. Miniatures stuff is really big on like Kickstarter and board gaming and stuff right now. So to make a game that's kind of halfway between a board game and Warcry, which Warcry already kind of being halfway between Warhammer and a board game, makes a lot of sense right now. And so there are two really big efforts to kind of take aim at Warcry and kind of come for GW's crown, which makes, again, like I said, a ton of sense because I think there's legit demand for this, and I think there's also, I would say it's the weakest of Games Workshop's offerings, not in terms of the actual game. Warcry is an incredible game, but in terms of how it's being pushed by GW, I think GW is very clearly putting less effort into Warcry than they are into, say, Blood Bowl, Kill Team, Age of Sigmar, or 40k. You know, probably less effort than Necromunda too. It does seem like it's getting more than Underworlds is now, but you know, I would say that's it. And then, you know, Aeronautica, stuff like that is below it, but it's certainly probably the 5th most pushed game by GW at the moment. So it makes a lot of sense in terms of demand versus how big GW's stranglehold on the space is for these two big competitors to be coming into it. So the first one, I actually joined the Kickstarter for this last summer, but it's going to be shipping in April. It's called Judgment Eternal Champions. It's being put out, there's sort of two companies at the same time working on it, collaborating on it. I think it's Gunmeister Games and Creaturecaster. Creaturecaster has a really beloved established history kind of in miniatures right now. They make really incredible proxies for Demon Heralds for, you know, either 40k, AOS, or Warcry, basically. And these Demon Heralds are going to be cross-compatible for Judgment, which is really amazing. Anyone with a one of the Chaos Gods demon forces, they're going to be able to play those forces. Well, not the forces, but the leaders of those forces in Judgment, which is really awesome. This game, you kind of play as champions aligned with one of 6 gods on a hex grid. It's either 3v3 or 5v5. So it's really cool where you can array your team however you want, but each god gives certain buffs to your team, which is going to change the types of teams you would want to make if that god is. So there's just a ton of different different combinations you can make. I think at the moment it's like in the low teens of champions that are available, but it's because of the way each champion is going to play slightly differently depending on what god buff they're getting, and some champions won't get buffs from certain gods, etc. There's just going to be a ton of different kind of list building combinations you can do, and they're calling the gameplay kind of MOBA inspired, I think, because the numbers are low and each character has very specific strengths and weaknesses assigned to given roles. There's also going to be 1 to 2 neutral monsters on the field, stuff like that. And then the hex grid, I think, is really interesting, kind of taking from Underworlds there, you know, just as a different thing you can get into. There's also Legacy of Atmos. Their Kickstarter is going to relaunch very soon. Q1 of 2022 is what they've been saying. One thing, so this one's kind of more skirmish. It's on a board slightly bigger than a Warcry board. But they've been creating really highly detailed sort of narrative and lore backgrounds for the game. So they've released 3 of their 4 or at least they've released info on 3 of their 4 factions so far. They've got kind of steampunk humans, various woodland folk, sort of dryads and satyrs, and, you know, angry satyrs, or fancy elephants is the other faction that's come out. And then there's the last one. It's heard rumors that it's going to be somewhat demonic, something like that. Who knows? They've launched a painting competition to happen, to be judged in February, which I think is a really cool choice to make. I think, you know, more small games trying to come for GW should do that. So these are both games that have huge teams around them that are kind of, they're not just like your average little, there's a lot of little games in the space, right? Like Frostgrave is a small game with a, you know, a cult following and a rule book, but they're not like a team of people who are just like legitimately like taking aim at GW here. And both of these are, which I think is really cool. Both games make really heavy use of cards to kind of add depth to the gameplay with having so few models. Of course, Judgment having, you know, even fewer, right, being 3v3 or 5v5. Also, both are playable online right now, and they have pretty decent sized playtest communities. Both of them you can get on their Discord, and if you post that you want to play a game, chances are, you know, within 45 minutes or so, someone will have challenged you to a game, and you'll be able to get into it right away. So while Warcry is, you know, orders of magnitude bigger than either one of these games, you could really argue that both of these have a more vibrant kind of playing scene, or something where you can actually do it. I'm curious curious to see if it's still going to be easy to play them online on Vassal after they release physically, right? Because, you know, different companies have different philosophies about whether that really cuts into their profits or not. But I know right now it's really easy to get a game in, and I'm looking forward to doing that, you know, hopefully to have time to review them after Adepticon, but before, you know, their stuff has shipped. Judgment is shipping in April, so there will be, you know, a little bit of time in between those two for me to get that review in and stuff like that. So I'm really excited. I am curious to see if the interest in, you know, fantasy skirmish wargaming is enough to support sort of all these games in the spot, right? There's, to name a few, right, there's Malifaux, Warcry, Judgment, Atmos, Bloodfields, Arena Rex, Relic Blade, Kings of War's Vanguard, Frostgrave, there's a game called Moonstone, Reign in Hell, One Page Rules has an Age of Fantasy skirmish game. I think this probably deserves its own video, but I do think that that's going to be one of the things that defines Warcry in 2022 is the success or failure of the games that are coming for it. You know, the games that are looking to take it off its, you know, pretty rickety throne right now, because yes, it is the biggest fantasy skirmish game, but it also hasn't really made a big play, and GW hasn't really promoted it enough to kind of solidify it there. So I think it's a great idea for these games to be shooting for it, and I'm really interested to see what happens. I would love, you know, if a year from now I'm, you know, playing one of these games and just liking it more than Warcry, I'm gonna let that happen, and I'm gonna, you know, make videos about these games if they really hook me. You know, is it likely that a year from now I'm making videos for both of these two competitors? No, probably not, right? This is a pretty tight level of competition going on here, but I do think it's really interesting to watch, and I'm really excited to see, you know, what it feels like to have the Judgment box in my hand once the Kickstarter ships. I'll probably join the Legacy of Atmos Kickstarter, and it's going to be really exciting to see what that's like, you know, once it's in your hand, and whether these companies manage to push the ability to play the games. Because, you know, I would say right now that's the weakest part of Warcry is, you know, GW sort of not feeling a need to push play, really, in-store play at all. Now, part of that's the pandemic, and that's part of why I've not really worried too much about it. But, you know, as the pandemic kind of changes, as maybe we get in-store play next summer, you could see that being a place where sort of an upstart gaming group or a game company could really budge into the spot. So I am really excited about, you know, all of these developments. There's, yeah, we're pretty deep into this video, but I'm glad we could kind of get it all out there. There's a ton to look forward to about the game. Um, I almost feel like I gave the fact that we're getting a new edition for Warcry kind of short shrift in this video, just because, you know, I have some ambivalent feelings around it, but the game itself is just really amazing, and I'm really excited. So you'll see me kind of the next few months. I probably won't make a ton of content in January, but you'll see me making some sort of more returning to competitive content for Warcry probably in February. I know there's only a few people, but yeah, I'm just very excited about playing it at Adepticon. And let me know, you know, what kind of coverage for Adepticon you want to see. For example, there's obviously way more people in the narrative event than there are in the competitive event. Do you want me to showcase kind of narrative lists or kind of narrative ideas for lists? I could do something like that. I never actually made my casual tier list. I just did a competitive and a budget tier list. So let me know if you want something like a casual tier list. I could absolutely kind of push that out too. So let me know in the comments kind of what types of content you want to see with all this stuff coming in 2022, because I'm really excited to make it. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.